Disney is undoubtedly the master of cinematic animation with decades of timeless films that have won the hearts of many and established the foundation of their mighty empire. But Disney animation has had its ups and downs, and if you're curious to check out my list of my favorite Disney animation films throughout all the eras, feel free to go check out that video after this one, and you can find that link in the video description down below. So even though traditional Disney animation has had its heydays of being the top animation division to beat, a new kid on the block came around and threatened to take that away from them. And that kid was Pixar. So what did Disney do? They bought Pixar so that they wouldn't have to compete with it. And quite a partnership it has been, especially at the Disney theme parks. But it's true to this day that Pixar rose to unimaginable heights as an animated feature film studio and has undoubtedly produced some of the most imaginative and innovative animated stories of all time, and therefore raised the bar for animation that much more. I'm not saying that every Pixar film is better than the current Disney animation films that are releasing, but there's no denying the impressive track record that Pixar has now that Disney animation used to have during the famous Renaissance era, but then tragically lost that momentum. But as long as Pixar is under the Disney umbrella, then Disney has nothing to feel threatened about, at least on a monetary level. And since I've given my list of the best Disney animation films of all time, I think it's now a perfect time to break down my top 10 favorite Pixar films of all time, just to even the score. And before we get to my top 10, I'm going to give you 3 honorable mentions of mine, and in order, honorable mention number 1 goes to Toy Story. Honorable mention number 2 goes to Finding Dory, and honorable mention number 3 goes to Coco. So let's dive right in, and we're going to start with my number 10 all-time favorite Pixar movie. And in my number 10 spot, we have A Bug's Life. Now, I thought long and hard about this one because it actually didn't make my top 10 list when I first drafted it. But when I stopped to think about it, I remembered how ironically large this film really feels. From the world building, the character development, the villain, the huge climax in the end, it's quite an ambitious film with amazing animation for the time it was released, and it strikes me as one of the most underrated Pixar movies that we have. Not a whole lot of people really talk about it, but the story is so epic and the characters are all wonderful. So that's why I gave it my number 10 spot. And in my number 9 spot, we have Ratatouille. Now, this movie only became better and better with age, just like a good wine. At first, when I was a kid and saw this movie, I thought it was cute, but not as exciting as other Pixar movies that immediately came before it. But as an adult, I find this movie incredibly endearing. It takes its time, and it has a maturity level just a little bit higher than most Pixar films, and maybe that's why I took more away from it when I watched it again as an adult, because now it leaves me feeling warm every time. In my number 8 spot, we have Toy Story 2. Not only was Toy Story a wonderful film, but this sequel blew my mind at the time and was able to elevate the Toy Story franchise that much more. The introduction of Jessie as a main character, the progression of Woody's overall character arc, and we can't forget one of the most touching and heartbreaking songs ever written for a Disney film called When She Loved Me. That song brings me to tears every goddamn time, and this movie made me believe that sequels can be better than the first, and it did so just effortlessly and with such triumph. In my number 7 spot, we have The Incredibles. Now, talk about a breath of fresh air. When this movie came out, superhero movies weren't quite what they are now. This came before the MCU even existed and before the Dark Knight trilogy. Superhero films were still trying to find their footing, but The Incredibles gave us a team-up superhero movie for the family that kind of paved the way for future superhero movies, if you think about it. The family dynamic was super relatable, perfectly imperfect, and the humor was top-notch, while also giving us some badass action set pieces and an incredible showcase of superpowers that made this new Pixar film an instant classic, in my opinion. In my number 6 spot, we have Toy Story 4. Talk about the sequel that pulled the rug out from many of us. Because after ending what appeared to be a picture-perfect Toy Story trilogy, many, if not all of us, scoffed at the notion of another Toy Story movie, saying that it was unnecessary and why make it and risk ruining the beautiful ending Toy Story 3 gave us. Well, the joke was on me because I ended up loving Toy Story 4, and this was the sequel we never knew we actually needed. Toy Story 3 gave us a perfect ending to Woody's relationship with Andy, but this movie gave us a beautiful conclusion to the story of Woody himself. A story I didn't know I wanted, but I am so grateful to have. It's not the best Toy Story film, but this movie proved that there was still life to this franchise and won my heart and brought me to tears yet again. All right, we're approaching my top 5, and in my number 5 spot, we have Monsters, Inc. Now, this was only the 4th film released by Pixar at the time. They had only released Toy Story 1 and 2 and A Bug's Life right before it, and this movie took the bar that Pixar already started and raised it several notches. I argue that this was probably the most original and innovative Pixar film they had created thus far at the time. And it was an incredibly touching story of best friends and new unexpected friendships. It's the bond of Sully and Boo that paved the way for future unexpected friendships like Remy and Linguini and Mr. Fredricksen and Russell. In my opinion, just think about it. This movie also boasted a tremendous message on the power of embracing new things and going against the status quo. It was refreshing, it was new, and it had so much heart. This continues to remain a timeless movie to me. And in my number 4 spot, we have Up. This movie has one of the greatest openings I've ever seen in any film of all time. You'll know the opening when you see it. This movie not only tells the ingenious story of a house that literally rose to new heights, but also the quality of the story when compared to past Pixar films brought this film to new heights unimaginable at the time. This movie is also probably one of the biggest tearjerkers of Pixar movies and has one of the most original and unlikely duos ever created between Mr. Fredricksen and Russell. This film is an example of Pixar at its best and most innovative, and I can't praise this powerful movie enough. And in my number 3 spot, we have Inside Out. Now, this movie blew my mind, and it's one of the most emotional Pixar movies I have ever seen. Pun unintended. Never in my life have I seen a story take such a complex subject matter as human emotion and create such a compelling film. This movie will be loved by kids, but I truly believe adults will take away so much more from this movie, especially when they tackled subject matters like forgetting your childhood imaginary friends. Bing Bong? Holy hell, break my heart. Also, the fading of certain memories over time and what memories shape us into who we are. It's such a groundbreaking message about how happiness and sadness really work as one, and the beauty within each emotion and what they can bring about for you. Inside Out is one of the best Pixar films I've ever seen to this day. In my number 2 spot, I have Toy Story 3. Now, there is so much I can say about this film, but one thing is for certain. This is the best Toy Story movie of the entire franchise, in my opinion. Not only was it hilarious, imaginative, and a fantastic ensemble film for all of our favorite Toy Story characters, but this is truly one of the best, if not the best, endings to a trilogy that I've ever seen. Of course, that all changed with Toy Story 4 coming out later, but at the time, this was the picture-perfect, tear-jerking ending we all loved and deserved for such an elite franchise. I also connected on a personal level to this movie because I was also a child when the first Toy Story came out. Like, I was the same age as Andy, and then I obviously too grew up just like Andy. And so the emotional toll this movie took for me by the end, and that tear-inducing goodbye to childhood and embracing the change of growing up, and it just pierced my heart in every way. And it's no surprise that this movie was a Best Picture nominee, not just Best Animated, a Best Picture nominee at the Oscars that very same year. This movie couldn't have done a better job at delivering the most beautiful goodbye story and a solid ending to a seemingly planned trilogy at the time. All right, it's time for my number one favorite Pixar movie. And in my number one spot, we have Finding Nemo. Now, through all the years and all of the amazing stories Pixar continues to produce, Finding Nemo still manages to sit at the top of my list. The journey of this movie is massive. It's scary, it's unpredictable, and the dynamic between Dory and Marlin is almost unbeatable to me. They still might be my favorite duo in all of Pixar history to this day. It's a tough one, but man, this movie has some of the best humor in all of Pixar films. I mean, how could you go wrong with Ellen? And the visuals are stunning. The message is moving, like Marlin's journey and perseverance of conquering his own timid fears and worries to get his son back. Dory's own self journey of her constantly having to lose her memory and hanging on to those that truly matter, and also being accepted by people such as Marlin, and establishing true friendship and people that won't shun her away. I mean, the story continues to build and build, and you never know where it's going to take you next. But the characters stick with you, and even all the supporting characters, everything from all of the fish with Nemo in the fish tank to all of the crazy characters that Marlin and Dory interact with along the way, everyone just makes an impression. Everyone adds something vital to this story, and the story is massive. And it really says something that I felt like every single supporting character was able to connect, to me at least, as I watched this movie. This film hooks you, pun unintended, like no other, and it continues to wow me even to this day. It has a special place in my heart, and that's why Finding Nemo is my number one favorite Pixar movie to this day. And there's my top 10 list for you, everyone. I am curious to know what you think. I am curious to know your favorite Pixar movies. Did your favorites make my list? Did your favorites maybe not make my list? Everyone has their own favorites, and that's perfectly okay. Feel free to share your favorites down below, and as always, thank you all again for tuning in. Until next time, I'm Ryan Bamey, signing off. Bye, everyone.